is going to lead us in a prayer today before our study. I'll let Rod do that. Thank you. Okay, and looking this morning at kindness, we're really starting to get into maybe a little bit of a different classification within some of the traits we've been looking at. The first three that Paul mentions, love and joy and peace, those very foundational things. Love especially, we talked about at the time, really kind of the rest of the 8 are in some way just different expressions of love. And joy and peace as well, things that are foundational. They're these kind of inward states. They're very much bound up in our daily experience and our general experience as Christians, or are meant to be. But they are also, all those first 4 ideas that we looked at, love, joy, peace, and patience, or long-suffering, things that can maybe be expressed in a couple of different ways or in several different relationships, especially looking at maybe the idea that we have expressed towards someone else, and then something that is more inward or even that is Godward, something that is a part of our relationship to Him. Love, for instance. We are meant to love our fellow man, but our greatest duty and the greatest command is to love God. The idea of joy. Well, sure, you can share joy with someone else, but it is also a sort of inward state. Peace. I can be and am supposed to be at peace with other people. I'm supposed to be a peacemaker, but it's also something that governs, maybe first of all, my own self. Long-suffering, patience, as we talked about last week, can have the idea of being patient with someone else, having tolerance towards someone else, long-suffering through someone that is maybe making us suffer, but it also can have its application in the various hardships and trials of life. When you fall into those various temptations, the testing of your faith produces patience and long-suffering. When we're looking at the idea of kindness, though, really we've gone strictly into the realm of a thing that is interpersonal. Maybe it would have applications elsewhere, but it isn't really. I think we'll discover as we start seeing what it really means. It isn't really something that we can show towards God, I suppose. It isn't really something in its full effect that we show to ourselves. You know, we'll say oftentimes, and maybe it's kind of a slogan or a motto of the modern world, be kind to yourself. And maybe there is some of that idea present, but really we're primarily dealing with something that is in the realm of me to you, something that I do for you, an attitude or a disposition or actions that I show to my fellow man. Kindness is really entering that realm of having its primary application towards someone else. So what is it that we are dealing with? First thing we've been trying to do every week is to just get a good definition and an idea of what the term itself is. So what are we dealing with when we talk about kindness? In your own words, or if you had time to look and kind of see this word itself, Christos is the root. We see several different words coming from this. Steve?
Goodwill toward others.
Okay. Goodwill, benevolence, oftentimes will be sort of synonyms that we'll encounter. Goodwill towards someone else. Gary?
Concern and goodness for others.
Okay.
And I would say the thing that fits to me right now is the Good Samaritan.
Okay. Very good example. We'll see in just a moment, the Good Samaritan. And good is one of the different translations, I guess a synonym that translators found a lot of times, this family of words. Sometimes you'll see goodness in place of kindness. They kind of switch back and forth. We're dealing kind of with the vagaries of translation at some point. But yeah, an idea of goodness shown towards someone, maybe picture in our minds what that Good Samaritan does for the wounded man that he sees on the side of the road. Lori?
And more than just thinking goodwill, it's action.
Okay. All right. Very difficult to be kind towards someone else just up here and say, no, I'm kind. I feel kind things towards you. If it's really true, if it's really present, it's going to come out. It's going to have some kind of application. There's going to be an action involved in it sooner or later. So again, not only are we firmly in the realm of things that I'm primarily expressing towards someone else, but things that have a very active component, things that have a very visible action behind them. Okay, good reminder. Others there. Really one of the key considerations, if we're trying to find as specific a definition as possible, one of the things that sets this word apart from just kind of thinking of being kind, being sweet towards someone else, being nice, trying to do something that will put a smile on someone's face. Okay, there is kind of that element to it, but more specifically than just a gentle disposition is the idea of doing something that is useful or doing something that is needed by someone else. It isn't just that I've done something good for you, and it was just something that kind of brightened your day. I think of this sometimes with spouses giving each other gifts for birthdays and so forth. I'm not advocating against it, by the way. Don't try that with your wife when it's your anniversary. Say, no, Drew said we don't have to give gifts. Not my point at all, okay? But there is an element to it that's always struck me as just kind of funny. I don't know. Beth and I that's our money. I give her a gift, and I'm buying something from our money. She gives me a gift. She's giving me something from my money. If I wanted to go and buy that for myself, I could do it. It's the thought that counts, and that's why it's a good practice to do, I suppose. It lets you know, well, I'm thinking of you, and I know the things that will make you happy, and so I wanted to show you that, and so here's this, and you don't have to worry about it, all those kinds of things. But there is an element to it that's just kind of moving stuff around, right? It's not something that I was incapable of doing otherwise. On the other hand, picture the Good Samaritan, for instance, as that good example of it. Here's a man on the side of the road. He's been beaten. He's dying. He's bleeding. He can't pick himself up and move on down the road to the hospital. He's in need. He has something that only this other person can do for him. That's what makes it this great act of kindness, is that if someone doesn't do it, it's not going to happen. And so true biblical kindness has that really behind it, the idea of fulfilling a need. And in this way, it's very connected to, really interlocked with the idea of grace. The New Testament conception of what it means to show grace, to show favor, to show kindness towards someone in the Greco-Roman world has the idea of meeting someone's need, of providing something for someone that they cannot do for themselves. And so it's maybe no surprise that the most common actor behind kindness, when you read in your New Testament, who is chiefly being spoken of when we see kindness being demonstrated? God, through Jesus Christ. And those are the references we see time and again. I'll look at just a couple to put the idea in our minds. Ephesians chapter 2 and verse 7, he is talking about what God has done through Christ, who is rich in mercy because of his great love with which he loved us. Even when we were dead in trespasses, he made us alive together with Christ and raised us up together. And this is now verse 7 of Ephesians 2. That in the ages to come he might show the exceeding riches of his grace and his kindness toward us in Christ Jesus. That's God's kindness toward us. You were dead in your trespasses. You were dead in your sin. You can't do anything about that yourself. You can't fix that state on your own power. You need someone to help you. You need someone to do that for you. That's God showing his kindness to do that, to elevate you out of that state, out of that position. Paul uses it this way in the Romans letter several times. In fact, 3 times in one verse in chapter 11, verse 22. But the first time in Romans 2 and verse 4. Do you despise the riches of his goodness, forbearance, and long-suffering, not knowing that the goodness of God leads you to repentance? That goodness, as it's translated, is our same word in Galatians 5, is the kindness of God. Well, that's the kindness of God that leads you to repentance. It's the kindness of God that has opened up all of these doors, that makes all of these spiritual blessings available to you. Peter uses it in 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 3. In Matthew chapter 11 and verse 30, it's Jesus talking there. In Matthew 11 and verse 30, where Jesus says, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. My yoke is kind, is what he's literally saying there. It's, yes, gentle, but it's providing something that you need. It's providing something, an act of goodwill towards you that isn't just, oh, that's nice. It's something that's absolutely necessary. Titus chapter 3 and verse 4, one further example that the goodness of God was shown. The grace of God appeared. It was because of his kindness, because of his goodness towards us. So there we're seeing the idea of God meeting a need that we cannot meet on our own. And that's the perfect expression of kindness. So if we then are trying to demonstrate this same thing to others, that's going to be some of the blueprint behind what we're trying to do. Not just being a sweet person, not just being someone who smiles, not just being someone that can cheer someone up, but someone that can provide a useful service to someone else. All right. Do we see this being, yeah, Garrett, before we move on.
I want to not necessarily disagree with you, but I would tell you that sometimes a nod, a pat on the back, a hug, a smile, fleeting glance
Yeah.
can also be a sign of kindness, because you never know what that other person's got on their mind.
Definitely so.
And you can lift their spirits just with a simple gesture like that.
And I think that would fall into the category of it's something I needed that I wasn't able to provide for myself. That kind of lift, that kind of boost, it can absolutely be found in small gestures. I suppose my point is simply that kindness doesn't stop there. That isn't the only thing that's involved when we're looking at this idea and how we might express it to one another. But yes, very good. I don't want to give the impression that that isn't lofty enough to be considered a kind act. No, it can be those very small kind of fleeting gestures can absolutely fill that role. Wilson?
One thing about kindness, it's not always just one way. You look at a person and you walk in. I walked in this morning and a beautiful lady smiled at me with that loving kindness smile. Now that lifts you up. That brings you into a state of mind to where you want to be a happier, more jovial, kind person.
Yeah.
So a lot of times people think kindness just has to come from one avenue. It doesn't. It comes from every avenue. When people are Christians, they exude kindness every day.
And it often is reciprocal. It often is something that kind of grows and compounds with itself, and we each end up edifying each other all the more, I suppose, because of it. Yeah, good point. All right, do we see this idea in command form? And if so, where? Aside from just saying, all right, it's a good thing to have, as we've seen with all of these different qualities in the fruit of the Spirit, there are things that we see the New Testament telling us, no, you need this. You have to do this. Steve?
Ephesians 4:32, be kind to one another, tenderhearted, forgiving each other.
Okay. Okay. A couple of instances there, 2 Timothy 2 and then Ephesians 4. Be kind to one another, tenderhearted and forgiving one another, even as God and Christ forgave you. Others, anyone else find additions to those? I think one other might just be Colossians 3 and verse 12. And it's very similar to that 2 Timothy 2 passage where he's kind of telling us the things that we must do. It's put in clothing terminology in Colossians 3. As the elect of God, holy and beloved, put on, clothe yourself with tender mercies, kindness, humility, meekness, long-suffering, bear with one another and forgive one another. It's kind of a component or a similar idea to Ephesians chapter 4, kind of the parallel passage there. How then, if I am trying to be kind to other people, how might that express itself? Can you think of specific ways that this does come through? I mean, we've kind of danced around or mentioned a few possibilities, I suppose, but think especially maybe in different texts and different settings and scenarios, how can we show kindness towards each other? Peggy?
In Acts 28:2, it says the native people showed them unusual kindness because they welcomed them and built them a fire.
Yeah.
Pretty simple.
Sometimes it is a pretty simple thing like that. Welcoming someone in and doing something for them that will warm them up, make them feel at home, show hospitality to them, and that in some situations can feel like an unusual kindness. There in Acts 28, I mean, they've been through an ordeal, haven't they? But sometimes that just being made to feel like you are at home, that's quite a thing to receive at times. Others. One that I really think of with that Ephesians 4 in verse 32. What does the second half of that verse say? And he's kind of building on, maybe adding to a little bit, but building on the idea of what kindness is or how it might be expressed.
Forgiving each other just as Christ forgave us.
Forgiving one another. Especially if you think in terms of the things we can't do for ourselves, the things that someone else needs to do. When you have wronged someone, you've dropped the ball, you've done something that offends someone else, and it offends you probably when you look back on it and think, why did I do that? I can't believe I did that. You know that feeling of guilt and disappointment in yourself, and hopefully we have a conscience that bothers us when we have wronged someone else. And that feeling is a terrible feeling. Oftentimes it is difficult to forgive ourselves. It is difficult to move on from something. It is difficult to feel whole or complete while that sin, while that bad action is hanging over us. For the wronged party to be patient towards us, to be kind towards us, and to extend forgiveness, to extend that humble, patient, Christ-like forgiveness to say, all is well, go in peace. That provides a peace, that provides a comfort that we can't find otherwise. You just can't derive that from some other source than from the person that you have wronged or the person whose forgiveness you need to say to you that you have it. That's a tremendous expression of kindness, to be forgiving, to not hold a grudge, to not continue dredging up some old thing, but to truly forgive as God has forgiven. That is a wonderful gift to be shown to someone else, a great expression of kindness. And really just as the basic, an exercise of basic Christian character. Some of the ideas that he mentions there in Colossians 3 and verse 12. And also 2 Timothy 2 that Steve mentioned, the idea of how the servant of God acts and comports himself, that it's maybe even especially in discussion or in teaching or when there has been a disagreement, that you do so with patience, and you do so with humility, and that you do so with this attribute that we're looking at, kindness. But the idea of not running roughshod over someone, not being overbearing towards someone, but to deal gently with someone, to deal kindly with someone. We know what that feels like, and we've been the recipient of it, and we're grateful for it every time it has happened. When you look back on an interaction afterward and say, boy, they let me off easy, right? They could have made things a lot harder for me. They could have made me feel a lot worse about this. And yet, they didn't. They showed kindness. Again, it maybe puts in mind the idea of grace, the idea of God's, that extension towards us that says, I'm showing you favor, I'm showing you kindness. Maybe you haven't done anything to deserve it. Maybe you deserve much worse, but here's instead what you are going to receive from me. Taylor.
One word through all that is mercy.
Yes. Yeah.
That's definitely a way. Same as forgiveness is mercy. But we don't necessarily always deserve it.
Yeah. Another very closely related concept, the idea of showing mercy to someone else. Others there, Steve.
I don't know if this is really kindness or love, but maybe it's both. I was wondering whether it could include pointing out error to someone, and they may not recognize themselves, like Simon the sorcerer, Paul to Peter, or Priscilla and Aquila to Apollos.
Yeah.
I mean, if they don't know, I think it's a benefit to them to know that they're doing something wrong, and it's a sign of love that you don't want them to continue in sin and different.
Yes. No, I would absolutely agree that is an extension of kindness. And again, that 2 Timothy 2 is in the context of teaching someone, in the context of showing someone what the right way is. At times that involves telling them, you're going the wrong way right now, and that needs to be corrected. If we're looking at kindness, if we're defining it as a goodness that provides what is needed, that provides a useful service to someone else, doing something profitable for another person, I profit greatly when I have a chance to correct my error. I have a great need for that, I suppose, and all of us do in life. So, from all of these passages, we see, yes, there is a right way to do it, that it actually does come to profit and a good outcome, because it's done with, maybe in Colossians 3:12 language, with tender mercy, with humility, with meekness, with long-suffering. There are things that govern how we might go about that. But correction, rebuke, those things are a kindness unto themselves. Okay, others. Heather.
In Proverbs 3:3, it says, "Do not let kindness and truth leave you. Bind them around your neck, write them on the tablet of your heart." And I think that's a way of reflecting God's character.
Yeah. Very well said. And this, again, this whole idea, I've asked for a moment for examples, but we've really already mentioned it. The idea of above anything else, who is the primary example? What character are we truly reflecting when we do so? It is a way of reflecting the character of God. Yeah, Wilson.
One thing that we need to understand about kindness, I think, is when we see a person that is in knowing that we know the Bible and all, but we see them walking in the wrong faith. They're not walking in the truth. Sometimes our kindness to try to correct them is not, it's too blatant. Sometimes we'll just blate out, well, don't you know what it says? It's so and so and so.
Yeah.
No, don't. We don't need to. The kindest way you could do that is to say, you know, next time you open your Bible, turn to
Yeah.
and read what it says. Don't take my word for it. Read what it says.
Yeah.
And that shows a kindness that will last in that person's mind, where an angry thought will cast it away.
Yeah. Maybe let's look at this together, or instead of attack mode and simply the harsh criticism. Yeah. I think that's very good to remember. Others there? Yeah.
I think too, in so much of this act of kindness, a lot of it, and it was, I think in the 2 Timothy passage where it calls us servants, so much of
Yeah.
kindness
Yeah. And building off that as well, in a lot of these, we'd be able to say the same thing, and maybe I have already mentioned it more in other classes too. We do talk about it a lot, maybe especially at schools with kids, and we're trying to teach them the right way. And, being kind is something people talk about a lot in the world. It's something that we often find lacking in the world, though, isn't it? Isn't this a quality, a trait that we see in pretty short supply out there in the wild? With many of these, if we are trying to show people God's thought, what God wants from us, not just what comes to me naturally, not just what the work of the flesh is, my natural state, but I am trying to show the character of the Lord, that sets us apart. It's noticeable, it's visible, because, and it is refreshing to people because it is something that many people may not encounter ever in their lives. People go through difficult lives, have difficult things heaped upon them from an early age, and may know very little true kindness. What a great opportunity that we have if we are being kind to everyone. You might show a small kindness to that person who it's like a light shining upon them for the first time. And might that cause them to look for the true source? And maybe you are able to show or to demonstrate, to teach them why that is important to me, because it's how my God has treated all of us. Very, very useful to remember that and to see the difference that this makes in the world. Denise?
Kindness requires a selflessness. And when we're with children, we're teaching them others first, not themselves, and it shows through kindness. We talk about society and common courtesy. We talk about that,
Yeah.
which is almost devoid in society.
Not common, yeah.
Every parking lot you ever drive out. So I think that is, utmost is that selflessness,
Yeah.
which lends itself to being able to put others' needs and what they need before our own, which then, looks and becomes.
Yeah. Very good point, and that servant mentality as well that Carrie was mentioning. Evidently, and this is something that is mentioned sometimes almost anecdotally. I don't know how much real evidence there is for this. Enough that evidently it was maybe mistaken among some ancient writers who thought when Christians were talking about Christ, they misidentify him as Christos, as this word. And evidently was in use as a common name for a servant, a common name for a slave might be given this name, because that would be a useful attribute. It's what you would want out of someone who is serving you. It's what you would need for someone who is going to be a good servant. And so we're kind of seeing why. I mean, that's at the root of it. You have to be selfless in that way. Brady?
I was thinking just kind of going off of what they were saying too, is like this is a very sacrificial act as well, because it's not something like they were saying that is innate
Yeah.
in human nature, and that's kind of why we see it lacking in our society. And so for someone to go out of the way, I feel like it's very intentional. Like when you are being kind to someone, that is an intentional act that you are doing. Because it's not the first thing that comes to mind.
Yeah.
Like we are a self-serving people in a lot of ways. And when you're kind to someone, like she was saying, you are being selfless. You're serving someone else
Yeah.
and sacrificing something of your own.
Yeah.
So it's just, I think something that, and that's why it is the refreshing nature to others. It's like, wow, this person, sacrificed the time to, just smile at me. Like he was saying, it can be those kind of things.
Yeah.
And I don't get that really.
Right.
So.
Yeah, they thought of me instead of themselves first, and that can be something very rare. But it is that, and I guess it all goes back to. I mean, we talked about love first, was our first discussion, and we noted the idea of that love being primarily. I mean, it is at its root, at its heart, the idea of an agape, the idea of love in a biblical sense, is is sacrificial, is something that does not put self first. Maybe self is harmed. Maybe it is difficult when you show love towards a person. It comes at an expense to you, and kindness oftentimes will have that exact same result or have that same interaction. Gary?
Got to go back to Galatians 5. If you look at that list for dealing with you're developing an attitude.
Yeah.
How you want to conduct your life. And those attributes are Christ-like attributes. He is the prime example of that. And so as we go through life, if we're going to, it's not something that you wake up and you say, oh, I'm going to do this today. It's something that is automatically there, basically.
Yeah.
And when you do something to contradict that, you're immediately aware of it. You don't always necessarily repent at that minute. But, sometimes you do things that you shouldn't have done.
Right.
But your attitude has got to be to come back to that center balance.
And hopefully it strikes us and does immediately kind of sound those warning bells within us as being something that is out of character, that is discordant and at odds with these other traits that we're seeing and what the New Testament calls us to be, that when we do something unkind and we do something that's lacking in kindness, that it immediately stands out and we go, well, that's the opposite of what I should have done. I mean, there was a right path to take and I didn't take it. But yes, because it is in this setting of, in the context of all of these other things that comprise my character, it isn't just a kind of a one deal, but because I am also to be loving and I'm also supposed to be patient and I'm also supposed to make peace with people and all these other ideas, that kindness just slots in there right with the rest of them as a part of our makeup, a part of our character. Taylor.
A wise man told me long ago that you never have to apologize for being kind. And if you read this, Jesus doesn't apologize very much.
Yeah. It's always something, and maybe that's kind of to the point there of the end of this list of the fruit of the Spirit. Against such there is no law. I mean, you're not ever going to be, I don't know, at risk of doing something that you can't be proud of or that didn't do what it was supposed to if you were showing that kindness. No need to apologize. There is no law against them. Yeah. Others to mention here. All right, we kind of have mentioned a little bit of it here just a second ago. In what sense, though, because we've been looking in Galatians 5 is the idea that they're the fruit of the Spirit, it's the produce, the product. In what sense is that the case? How does following the Spirit make us kind? Why would that be the natural result of following the Spirit of God, being led by the Spirit, that I will end up being kind? In what sense is that true? Yeah, Matt.
I think it gives you purpose. I think the hardest thing is when you're faced with evil, to return it with kindness. And that's when kindness gets really hard. But when you do that, it shows that you're doing it for a reason, and the reason is that you have purpose in your life.
Okay, I like that idea that here you have in the New Testament, and if you're attentive to the will of God, if you're being led by the Spirit, you see the purpose behind it. You see that it is a part of a calling. It is a part of a way of life that we are meant to truly walk. And that makes it easier to do something that doesn't come naturally, that isn't first instinct. But we know that we are meant to, and we see the reasoning behind it, and we see what it accomplishes, and we see the examples of it, and we see it in the character of our God. And so we end up convincing ourselves, no, I do need to do this every day, every time. Here's what I have to put into practice. I think that's good. Steve.
To me, the Holy Spirit gave us the Word. The Word tells us that we're to love one another as ourselves. So you're not going to be unkind to yourself. You take care of, you try and take care of your needs. You try and take care of the needs of others.
Okay, maybe developing that idea of seeing others the same way we see ourselves, in the sense that following the golden rule, what I would wish to happen, what I would want in my life, what I want someone to do for me, that's what I'm going to do for someone else. And that kindness definitely right at the heart of that. Wilson.
And kindness is taught.
Yes.
People don't understand that. Kindness is taught. You take these little kids, and you never tell them, no, you don't do that. You don't hit each other. You don't strike. Like that. Then they will go on the rest of their life growing into that attitude.
Yeah.
We have to take, and with new Christians, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
It has to be taught that kindness is there. My attitude is at the job, oh, you know better than that. Don't be. But as a Christian, I'm saying, well, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Don't you understand the difference in what you're doing and what's right? And people don't realize that you're not born with kindness.
Yeah.
You have to develop it.
Yeah, a learned behavior for sure. And again, some of us maybe start learning it earlier in life than others might, and see more examples of it earlier in life than others might. But so many of our base instincts, so many of our natural impulses follow instead what we see there in Galatians 5, those works of the flesh. It's so many things that are contrary to them. I guess that was the last question that I asked, but one that we've looked at every time, sort of. Think of the opposite numbers of kindness, and a lot of times they're the things that we slide naturally into. But what do you think of there as the antonyms? What is the opposite, or an opposite? There probably would be a few of kindness.
He answers that question in Ephesians 4:17. He says, "This I say therefore and testify in the Lord, that you henceforth walk not as Gentiles walk, in the vanity of their mind." They put their beliefs in everything above anything that a kind person can give them.
Yeah, and that's empty ultimately. Yeah, Nathan. Yeah.
I'm going the wrong way, but this is actually quite hard. And the only way that we're going to get there is with God's help. And He gives us the help if we are seeking.
Yeah. And definitely in line with what we've seen from the other traits as well, that this is, because it is not natural, but because it is so needed, yes, we have to work at it. Yes, we have to police ourselves and monitor ourselves, but it is God's shaping and refining and transforming, allowing the Spirit to do His work, allowing the Word to do its work, allowing God to truly sort of take over our lives in that sense. That is how you get there. And it does exist on a scale. It is something that we won't be flawless in from the jump and may not ever reach perfection in, but constantly working to improve. Okay?
I was going to go to your question that you asked about opposite.
Yeah.
And just looking at it, I came up with two different opposites that were kind of different. One was like intentionally being cruel to someone. I mean,
Yeah.
that takes action in being cruel. And then another opposite is kind of like apathy.
Yes.
Just not even caring, not doing anything.
Yeah. No, I came up with the same thought in thinking about that. Maybe our minds would immediately jump to, like, being malicious and, okay, instead of helping someone, I'm going to hurt them. And instead of saying something that will build this person up and set them back on the right path, I'm going to tear them down and try and make them miserable. Well, that's obviously the opposite of what you want to accomplish. But and I think we're seeing this with a bunch of these traits, isn't it also simply being not at all kind if I just don't care? If I just don't care about you, I don't care what you've got going on, I don't care what you're doing, I don't care if you're having a difficult time, you're on your own. I'm not going to do anything to hurt you, but I'm not going to do anything to help you. We've talked about the Good Samaritan a few times. Those first two men that walked past, they're being unkind, not because they stopped to kick him or they stopped to add something on to the bad day this guy had already had. They just didn't do anything. That's not very kind either, is it? To when we have the opportunity to do good, to not take it, to simply say, well, I don't care. I think there's something to that. Heather?
I think you just said it, but I was going to say lack of consideration
Yeah.
of others.
Yeah. Inconsiderate, that lack of concern, lack of feeling towards someone else. Yeah, Brady.
I just kind of had a question because I
Sure.
feel like a lot of these words, of course, are reciprocal with each other in a lot of ways, but God, of course, makes a distinction between each of them.
Yeah.
So my question would be like, we kind of been talking about a lot of things that would also be connected to love.
Yeah.
Where's the line drawn between kindness and love? Because of course both of them are great and they're gonna help each other out.
Yeah.
But God makes a distinction. And so where should we be thinking, okay, this is a loving act, and maybe
Yeah.
this is a kind act?
Honestly, I don't know that we can really see a distinction between the two. And I think in many ways, especially maybe in that Galatians 5 list, the further you get into it, the more is just explanation of or refinement of the original concept. And I do think love sits at the top, sits in that first position, as it often does in these lists of virtues, primarily for that reason. Everything else is going to be kind of under that umbrella and is going to just explain it a little bit better in maybe specific scenarios. So sometimes my love is shown towards someone in making peace, and sometimes it's shown in proactively being kind in the first place. Sometimes it will be shown in controlling myself, as he gets to the end of the list. So the shades of meaning are difficult to find, I suppose. Maybe, and we'll talk about this a little bit next week, some are of the theory that you have these three triads of virtues here among the 9. Love and joy and peace kind of going together as those foundational, almost inward states. And then these middle 3, long-suffering and kindness and goodness, might walk you along the idea of long-suffering or patience means not getting annoyed at someone. I'm restraining myself. Kindness is maybe more my disposition towards them. And then goodness is actually taking that final step to actually acting on it. And there might be something to that. As we've said, though, I think with this idea of kindness really just has to have action in mind almost from the beginning and is going to be expressed in that way. Gary?
When Scripture says grace leads to love,
Yes.
all of these other things are expressions of love.
Yeah.
They are a degree of love. And when you put it all together, they become a fullness.
Yeah. I think in much the same way, Jesus describes it that on that command, or on these commands, love for God and love for fellow man, hang all the law and the prophets. It all rests upon that. And the rabbis of his day really had the same mind in their interpretation of the law. I think it was Rabbi Hillel said that command is the greatest, and all the rest is explanation, or all the rest is details, depending on the translation. So yes, it is all just different ways of looking at what does it actually mean to show love towards someone else. All right, we have exhausted our time, so we're going to finish there for this morning, and next week we'll look at goodness. Very similar, as we talked about just a moment there. Yes, there is a distinction, and God uses different words, not just to repeat things. So we'll see kind of the difference between the two next week, but we'll get into that discussion of goodness. Thanks so much for your time today.